Hi, welcome back to another video. This is going to be a short one to follow up on my initial impressions of Assetto Corsa Evo. This is going to be a really short follow-up, and it's going to focus primarily on the sounds and the feel of Assetto Corsa Evo as it is right now, version 1.2 of the early access program. And because version 1.1 opened up the rest of the cars in the garage, it means I'm able to compare it to a car I actually have real-world, real-life experience of driving. The Audi RS3. The 400 brake horsepower flat 5 straight engine configuration gives you an audio experience that is like a chorus on the ear. I wanted to listen to hear how close Kunos had got to the real world sound with their RS3 Sportback in Assetto Corsa Evo. And whilst it isn't perfect by any means, it doesn't sound exactly like the car in real life, but it's really close. Another thing that they've got from the real car is the oil temperature, oil pressure caution light that comes on when you first start the car. It's a feature to protect the engine from a cold start and you over revving it when it isn't ready. What I noticed in the couple of hours that I drove the car in Evo was that the light seemed to come off after a certain distance. It didn't really seem to matter whether you were revving the car to 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 RPM or not. I don't know what it's exactly tied to, but I found that when I got to the end of the straight Mount Panorama, it always went off at exactly the same time. Perhaps it's because the car seems to be stuck at 26 degrees C for its internal ambient temperature. However, in real life, dependent on the climate, dependent on the weather, if it's minus degrees or it's up in the high 30s, the engine oil temperature and pressure will obviously be different, so the light will go off at different times. However, what you'd also have in real life is on the tachometer, there will be a temporary gauge that would show you not to go above 5,000 RPM. However, that's details, right? Maybe Kunos will introduce it later on, but they don't really need to. That's just being pedantic. What you'd also find driving from the real car, just like any other car you've driven in real life, is there's a lot of sound going on in the cabin as the car jostles along on the road, because the road isn't a billiard board, because you've got potholes, you've got camber, you've got all sorts of ruts and everything. You've got the acceleration, deceleration, you've got the lateral G. The car is always moving around on its suspension. The chassis is always having an element of torque going through it. Then when you think about the seating and all of the plastics or carbon in the cabin, there is always some sound going on. And in Evo, you also have some cabin noise going on, which is a really nice feature. Since the initial hours that I spent in the game, I've spent this morning tweaking my force feedback. I've gone more to what I would normally run, so instead of what the game suggested you had for the profiler settings for a Fanatec wheel where you didn't have 100% force feedback set, I've set the force factor to 100% and dialed it down in game. I've also turned off quite a few of the filters, like the damping effect or the steering weight effect. I've gone back to a more pure setup that I would normally run in any other game, and I like the way that it feels. Whilst I still don't quite get a feel of the tyre contact patch in contact with the actual road, I am loving the amount of information coming back through the wheel about how the car is moving around on its suspension. As you can see in the real world footage, going along a bumpy potted road or any road, you move around a lot in your seat. Your head moves around a lot. You probably don't notice it in real life. Well, we don't notice it in real life because our eyes compensate for the motion. And we don't have that in game. We don't have that through the seat of our pants jostling around unless we have a motion rig, or perhaps you might have some subwoofers attached to your seat, or you might be wearing a haptic vest or something, or you might have one of those really amazing rigs where you've got the haptic seat belts that you can have pulling yourself around to give you that mimicked G effect. For the most part, for most of us out here, we don't have any of that. All we have is what's coming back through the wheel. So perhaps that not feeling the wheels in actual contact with the road isn't an issue. I'm going to have to go out and do some more miles in my road car to see if I actually notice it in real life. You obviously notice the traction that you have in real life. You know when you've gone over standing water and you're aquaplaning. You know when you've gone over silt at the edge of the road, or if it's rained and it's washed silt onto the road and it's wet. You feel the brakes in traction, and you feel the lateral G when you're going through a medium or higher speed turn on the road, whether it's a B road or it's on the motorway. But I don't know if I feel the car actually being in contact with the road through the tyre surface that I'm looking for in the game. I don't know if it's a placebo. I have to go and pay more attention to it in the real world. Evo, I definitely don't feel it. But that jostling effect, that moving around, that sense of inertia, which is the word I was struggling for yesterday, the inertia being transmitted through the wheel is brilliant. Reminds me of the very first laps I ever drove in Grand Prix Legends or Stunt Car Racer, where you applied the brake, came off the brake, and the car moved around on its suspension. The weight shifted around. It wasn't like many of the games I'd driven before then, where you could brake, throttle, and it didn't really make any difference to the pitch motion that you felt from the car. And the thing about the RS3 with its Quattro drive system is you don't feel it slipping a lot. I actually never have driven at that rate of knots in real life in the car to ever feel that. However, you do feel in the wet and in the snow, in icy, slushy conditions, you feel that Quattro helping you keep the car as a really stable platform beneath you. And anybody who's driven a rear-wheel drive car in the wet where there's standing water, or in snowy, slushy, icy conditions, knows how that feels completely different. You know how the car is always trying to break traction a little bit at the rear. And in Evo, the Audi RS3 that they have in here with that Quattro drive system feels just as stable compared to the other cars in game. So I can actually see myself spending quite a lot of time when the roaming map comes out driving the RS3. It has a really nice sound, it has a really nice drive. I'm loving the way that the suspension feedback is coming through the force feedback. It isn't perfect, it doesn't sound exactly like the real car. The real car has lots of pops and low gurgles at low speed when the engine's ticking over around 4,000 RPM, 3,000 RPM. However, the in-game car still sounds good. The in-game car still feels nice to drive. I still have to figure out my force feedback because in real life, I've never driven the car to the degree that I'm driving it in game for good reason. But in real life, there is never a moment through any degree of rotation on the wheel where it feels as though you've lost feedback through the wheel. And I don't know what it is right now in Evo, but there are moments where perhaps it's the tires gripping up and then losing traction. I don't know, but there are small moments across the top of the steering where it feels like I've lost the feedback. But that's just probably me. I probably just need to go and tweak it. And these are my thoughts, day 2.